So Crittercism, essentially what we do is we provide detailed real-time diagnostic information for companies to monitor, prioritize, and troubleshoot the performance of their mobile apps in the hands of their end users or customers. And I'll give you some more context of that, but we're used by many of the leading firms, both in the internet and retail and financial services space like PayPal, Groupon, or Urban Outfitters. Okay, now with that quick backdrop on Crittercism, let's turn to the contents of the webinar. I'd like to call, Kristina, could you walk the audience through some of the trends that are impacting retail and mobile commerce today and the consumer experience?
Great, thanks, Josh. So if we could go to the first slide. So it's no secret that mobile adoption is increasing exponentially. You know, there are 4.5 billion mobile phone users worldwide, and about 1.8 of them are on smartphones. Now, what's interesting for the retail sector is that some 80% or more of the web traffic that they're getting is coming through the mobile device, and that's both phones as well as tablets. Now, it's not just for the big brands, but also for small, relatively new brands. They're getting their traffic primarily from mobile. However, even though they're getting some 80% of the web traffic from mobile, only 6.9% of their transactions are converting and actually becoming purchases. And in those transactions, however, if you look at the number of the way it's increasing, mobile transactions are increasing 48%. So that 16.9% number will increase as retailers become more savvy about measuring their mobile applications and how they interact with the consumer from that medium. And you can see from the last bullet point that tablets, because of the wider screens, are actually represent a greater part of the transaction. And we can go to the next screen now. Now, what's important to note is in the last year, we've had a couple of tipping points in terms of consumer usage of their mobile for accessing the retail sites. U.S. consumers spent more time on mobile devices than desktops in 2014, and with that number, 55% of the top iOS apps and 58% of the top Android apps offer in-app purchasing. So the channels for mobile purchasing the walls are coming down and the channels are opening up. So we should see an increase of that 16.9% number significantly in the next 2 to 3 years. Worldwide, commerce is going to grow by estimates to $516 billion by 2017, with $144 billion of that in North America. The next slide. Now, in this situation, what you're seeing is retailers are moving, companies are moving their mobile operations in-house. And this is because they're finding that the agencies that they've seeded their mobile interfaces to in the past know the technology, know how to do great design and great UI, but they don't necessarily know the customer. So the retailers and other companies that deal with consumers are pulling their operations back. And what you're seeing is there's a blurring in the line between who is a retailer, who is a mobile technologist, an inventor, and a creator, and the service agencies that handle the UI. To a certain extent, they're working together, but to a great extent, especially the big retailers are finding that bringing the apps in-house is becoming more important for them to be able to communicate with the consumer through the channel. We can go to the next slide. Here are some of the brands that have morphed their roles over the years. Twitter, Facebook have gone from being technology community sites to entering the retail space, with Facebook recently registering as a payment money transfer company in Ireland, and having hired the former head of PayPal, David Marcus, into their ranks because they're intending to have mobile commerce as part of their messenger app. Tencent recently opened an office in Palo Alto here in the U.S., and they are significantly looking at ways to monetize via the mobile channel primarily. Starbucks, of course, is well known in the retail space for having not only using Square and seeing more than 16% of its transactions come over to the mobile channel, but they're actually developing their own technology in-house, which is interesting. So Starbucks is becoming a technologist that may actually start to sell their own mobile payment technology to other retailers and other companies as they deal with the consumer. The next slide. So for retail operations and for consumers alike, the choices of solutions is confusing and immense. The landscape is very complex, and it's getting more complex every day. The next slide. And within this world, traditional retailers that have grown up with the brick and mortar and later on just feel like they're just getting a handle on the desktop traffic, the web traffic, are finding that they're coming against competitors that are getting founded in the mobile age. And what you're seeing is that companies like Uber, Airbnb, and Gift, who are very facile in their mobile operations, are building their brands fast and gaining trust with consumers because of their mobile facility. And on top of that, this is the number of specialized apps are proliferating. So in terms of competition, it's not just competition with other retailers, but companies are facing competition from other apps. So the mind share of the consumer can only handle about 30 apps at most, and in terms of active usage. And in this space, they're very specialized apps, game apps, news apps, what have you, that the retailer needs to compete with. So the number of apps in which users actually interact with in terms of transactions can be quite low when you look at the world of the app usage for the user. The next slide. So focusing on the consumer, him or herself, the consumer is becoming more empowered, via the mobile channel. Time, value, and convenience is something that they believe they can have. Next slide. And significantly, the mobile experience needs to be easy. You can get to tap a button and get your results in minutes. You can finish your transaction. Mobile should be easier than online. Next page. Now the journey to the transaction is quite complex. The user researches via their computer and then continues on their iPad in front of the TV. Then they go to work and look up prices via the phone. And they're also constantly inundated with news feeds from Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and other social media sites. So this, and then in the near future, the Internet of Things will be coming to the home and to the street, so that not only will the users be able to access mobile websites, or rather websites through their handheld device, but you'll be able to buy a Coke and there'll be an Internet connection there on the street. You might be walking by a kiosk on the street and be able to transact there. So it's not just the personal device you hold, but it will be the devices around you that you can transact on that will actually influence and increase traffic to the mobile channel, to the retail channel. And this is just an illustration of what I just discussed in terms of the customer journey. Next slide. What's different now, the journey has become more complicated, but what's interesting is that mobile plays a part in every stage of the mobile journey, and retailers don't always realize this. You know, they focus on the app, but then don't pay attention to the rest of the mix. So if you look at from left to right, from left down and then to right down, in terms of awareness, users oftentimes are exposed to the brand through social media. They see a friend using a product and their friend loves it. The decision to buy is then researched on the mobile in their free time as they're going to work or walking down the street or waiting in line. And the selection of the items might be completed on their computer, but the purchase may actually take place on the mobile. And then in terms of loyalty, rewards are actually, in cases like Starbucks, tied to their mobile usage. And evangelism certainly comes through on the mobile device in people retweeting or otherwise messaging, posting photos on Pinterest of the products that they like. The next slide. So what mobile is really doing is enabling the next generation of customer relations. The rich real-time data that retailers now have available are now going to let them create more relevant, personalized interactions. These interactions represent new ways to connect with the customer and offer new channels by which consumers can transact. And this allows retailers to, again, move beyond the store and the desktop into truly being where the consumer is anytime, anywhere. And in this environment, the brand, the mobile brand, not just the brand, but the mobile brand becomes more important. The mobile brand in and of itself can engender deeper consumer trust. And it's no longer just an engagement, but a give and take. So there's data coming from the user, but there's also interactions between the user and the brand. So it's no longer just a static push relationship of messages to the consumer, but the consumer, the channel of one, so to speak, is actually controlling the retailer's interactions with them in many ways. So the user is empowered to tell the retailer what they want. And if they don't like it, they go to another app. Next slide. Oh, and then that is my presentation.
You know, Kristina, there was one question I had for you. Just if you know, Internet of Things is, you know, perceived to be sort of off in the distance a little bit ways, you know, maybe 5 years, 10 years, you know, is the current thinking that people are going to really be shopping on the fly using connections to Internet of Things or through their cars, et cetera? What's your thought on that?
You know, that's exactly what they said about mobile, and the growth of mobile exceeded all expectations. And it's my thought that this will be the same with the Internet of Things. If you look at what's available now from a technology standpoint and from an operational standpoint in terms of production, the Internet of Things already exists and is there to be adopted. Companies are already putting Internet connections and smart screens in cars. Coca-Cola is making smart vending machines. New York City is turning their phone booths into Wi-Fi hotspots, which could potentially become multimedia kiosks. That Philips, many other companies that GigaOM works with are already heavily invested in and involved in the Internet of Things. So it's here, and I think consumer adoption will begin to increase in the next 2 or 3 years.
Perfect. Well, thanks for clarifying that. So with that, why don't I transition things into Terry's section, which moves from the trends into more of a how do you think about the various use cases and concepts to focus your attention on? And Terry and Mobiquity have done some very detailed technical analysis and innovation around this space and things that I think you're likely not to have seen put together in this way. So Terry, could you walk the audience through a little bit through your retail innovation program and give them a flavor of some of the things that Mobiquity is bringing to the table in terms of innovation on this front?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Josh. And thank you, Kristina. Sounds like we have a bit of an echo. But I'll try to push through that. So it sounds like, Kristina did a great job of talking about some of the challenges that exist within this mobile space and the mobile commerce space. And at Mobiquity, what we have done is we've kind of zoned in specifically on how mobile is affecting the in-store customer experience. And we have taken that kind of customer journey from the minute you walked into a retail store all the way through the whole shopping experience and being assisted by retail staff, all the way through the actual exit of the store. And we have broken that experience down into what we have defined as 18 mobile-first in-store concepts. And what we mean is there are 18 distinct areas where mobility can have an effect on that in-store experience. And we call the program Hydra. That is just our internal code name for the program, but it really is what we call a retail innovation program. We're taking each of these 18 areas and we are defining a series of labs, if you will. And Josh, if you want to advance to the next slide, we can kind of talk about these individual 18 areas. I don't have time to go into the detail of each of these 18 areas, but you can see from the icons and from the general descriptions kind of the specific how each area focuses on a discrete component of that experience. And what we're doing is basically taking each of these 18 concepts. And the first thing is we identify what are the key customer experience and business process and technical challenges associated with each of these concepts. And in some cases, retailers don't even know the right questions to ask in each of these concept areas. So that's one of the things we're trying to do first is to identify what those key questions are that need to be asked. And then we actually design a series of labs where we test these innovation hypotheses in each of these areas. As an example, with the welcome concept, which is at the top left of your screen there, we are exploring different sensor and beacon technologies and determining how can those technologies be used most effectively to determine when customers are walking by the front of your store or when they're in vicinity of your store. When can we identify when the consumer actually walks into the store, as well as determining how long and specific dwell times inside of the store, and even all the way to the point of when do we know when they've exited the store. And those are discrete data points that are very important as we start tracking different metrics and different things about that customer experience. And I could go through each of these 18 concepts and talk about that level of granularity in each of these concepts. But I want to get kind of fast forward and just talk about how each of these concepts can be kind of mixed together from a retailer perspective. But before I kind of get into that, I just wanted to explain a little bit more about what we do as a part of the process. I mentioned that we design what the questions are, but then we create a series of labs where we actually test those hypotheses. In each of the labs, we will actually create user experience designs, wireframes, and workflows. We'll even create some native mobile apps and some associated back-end services so we can actually proof out those concepts. And then we publish our findings in either concept briefs or white papers. And in some cases, we are actually collaborating with retailers during this process and even testing some of these concepts in, retail store type environments. And certainly we provide advisory services to retail clients based upon the findings we have in each of these areas. So to kind of give a better example of this, I want to zone in on one particular user persona. We define these different user personas as a part of our process, and this is this particular user persona is a lady by the name of Isabel. We call her Izzy internally, and she is not only a consumer, but she's a specific type of consumer. She's what we call a Generation X social browser. So she is the type of shopper that prefers to go into a shopping environment. She likes the shopping experience. She uses her mobile device to get information while she's shopping. She's connected from a social media standpoint. She gathers feedback from other people. And this is the type of shopper she is, as opposed to somebody who may be a more pragmatic shopper who just wants to get in and out very quickly. So keep in mind, Izzy, I'll talk about her a little bit as we go through a couple of these different experiences. If we go into the first slide here after this model may look a little bit complex when you first look at it, but we call this the Hydra DNA model. And what this basically shows is all 18 of these concepts, and it shows specifically how each of the concepts relates to the other concepts. And you can see which of the concepts become really key aspects of that total customer experience. And I'm going to do a couple of what we call remixes, where we'll actually select certain components within this experience, within these concepts, and see how they relate to each other. So go ahead to the next slide there, Josh. This first remix we call the welcome remix. And if you can see, we have 4 nodes or 4 concepts that are highlighted. We have the welcome concept, and with the welcome concept, as I mentioned previously, we can actually capture traffic data about consumers who are walking by the store, entering the store, dwelling within the store, or even exiting the store. The me concept is where we actually attempt to identify that specific consumer that walks in, based upon their profile, their demographics, or any consumer behavioral data that we may have in a disparate number of systems about that consumer. The loyalty concept can actually provide data regarding that consumer's relationship with the retailer. And lastly, traffic is where we actually generate a set of metrics which allow store managers to optimize consumer traffic and understand more about the people who are actually walking into their stores. So this is an example of one remix. If you go to the next slide, we can actually choose.
Barry, can I just ask a quick question? So the concepts you're talking about here, sort of the 18 different concepts, are these actual turnkey products? Are they implemented today? How should the audience think about these?
That's actually a great question. We get that question a lot. And keep in mind that this is a retail innovation program. This is not necessarily a retail product development program. So at this stage, what we're really focused on is innovating in each of these areas. As I mentioned previously, identifying the key issues, doing some proof of concepts and some proof of technologies to explore what are the key issues and technologies that are needed to provide solutions in these areas. A later stage of this would be to actually take this research and this innovation and turn that into solutions and specific products or components that retailers can use. So at this point, we actually collaborate with retailers and some of the innovation teams within those retail organizations to explore these concepts. So this is really more of an innovation and exploration program than it is a product development program at this point. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
That makes sense. Thanks for clarifying.
You're welcome. So this concierge remix that we have on the screen here, you can tell by looking at the concierge concept, which is right in the middle of this diagram, you can see how connected it is to quite a few different other concepts. And what concierge is, think of a retail associate, a staff member who actually has a tablet in their hands. So on that tablet, we want to provide them with all of the tools that they need to provide superior levels of customer service to consumers who are in the store. In order to do that, there's some discrete capabilities that they need to have. As an example, pickup. In some cases, you may have a consumer who has already ordered something online and they are strictly coming to the store just to pick up that particular product. So at the concierge level on the tablet itself, if we could actually see the consumers who are scheduled to come in and pick up their products And if we can recognize from the minute they walk in the store through the welcome concept that that consumer has entered the store, then a retail staff associate could be enabled and ready to actually assist them with that pickup transaction. Promotion is another example. When they are actually picking up a specific product, it would be great if the retail associate could actually be given additional information about that consumer, about their shopping behaviors, their preferences, their profile information, so we could actually make recommendations for additional products or incremental sales that that retail associate could recommend to the customer and hopefully increase the value of that sale. Part of doing that is actually being able to what we call impersonate the customer, and that means to see on the concierge device similar information to what the consumer might see within their mobile app, if it's the retailer's app. So we know what they're being communicated by the retailer on their mobile application, and we can complement that by that in-store customer service experience. Mobile point of sale is also something that where either the retail staff could actually check them out right at the point in order to provide a superior level of customer service. And one of the things I didn't really mention at the very beginning of this is these 18 concepts not only apply to the consumer user persona that we're talking about here, but in some cases there are aspects of it that apply to the retail associate or maybe the operations manager or even the vendors that do business with the retailers. So there are really 4 different user groups, if you will, that Hydra may actually impact and affect. And time cards is a good example of a concept that we would put into the concierge experience because it's a logical place for a retail staff member to check themselves in and out, just like a regular time card process, or check themselves in and out of a particular department, as an example. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give you one more remix before we kind of wrap this up. This is a remix we call showrooming, and in this particular remix, showrooming embraces this consumer behavior that retailers have struggled with, where a consumer is actually, doing product comparison shopping while they're in the store on the mobile devices, or maybe they're searching to see price comparisons, or they're looking for other store locations which may have a particular product. And there are specific things that a retailer can do and features that they could put within a mobile application and within that in-store retail experience that would kind of combat that showrooming behavior, or actually try to take that behavior and turn it around to be a positive thing within the retail environment. So that's what the whole showrooming concept is focused on. Part of that integrates with welcome, because welcome provides us notification when that customer actually leaves the store. Let's say that they actually come into the store, they're browsing around the store, and they use their mobile app from the retailer to actually do some comparison shopping, and then they leave the store without purchasing anything. Well, in that particular case, we might want to do some additional things to enable that customer. It's almost like a retargeting opportunity. If you know what retargeting is in the e-commerce world, we are now getting to the point where we can start to do some of that inside the in-store experience. So if we gave that customer the ability to add some of the products within the store easily onto their wish list, and maybe they leave the store, they haven't purchased the product, but they have that added on their wish list, and then they get home, they do some additional research, and they say, well, you know what, I think I really do want to buy that product from that retailer that I was in their store. It's the best, overall product feature set for the price that I found, and so we should give them the ability to purchase that right from their wish list on their mobile device. And that's an example of how these concepts can combat some of those issues that we're finding within the retail environment. So you go to the next slide here. And one of the coolest things about all the Hydra concepts is almost every single of the 18 Hydra concepts has the ability to impact certain key retail metrics. And we're actually going to the level for every single concept, we're identifying what those key retail metrics are, or those KPIs are. And some of those, or actually quite a few of those metrics, can be assigned what we call transactional risk values. That means you can assign a particular dollar amount that could be affected by how well that particular concept is implemented in the in-store experience. And this can actually help provide a return on investment for retailers who are thinking about exploring some of these concepts within their stores. And so when we come in and we actually innovate in each of these concept areas, it can actually produce tangible bottom line results for the retailers. And that's really where our partnership with Crittercism comes in, because Crittercism provides an excellent platform for us to capture a whole broad spectrum of analytics, not only on the performance of the mobile applications, but actually on creating transactional risk values associated with those features within the application. And so that's kind of where we've tied in with Crittercism to actually do some of these types of things. So at that point, I will transfer it back over to Josh, and Josh can kind of explain a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. So the final part of the webinar today, you know, the idea, the concept we wanted to put together for the webinar is give you a sense of where trends are going to put the puck, and then help you understand use cases and concepts that will give you ways to position your company for success. But then the final part of that is, you know, how do you ensure that you're measuring the success of that well? And that's what this last part of the webinar is about. Just to give you a sense of time, it'll take me just a hair over 10 minutes to go through this, and we'll take a couple questions at the end and wrap things up. As Terry was saying, you know, your organization is looking for ways to put together high-value transactions that drive bottom-line results, whether that's, you know, employee productivity, but, you know, more likely it's protecting the brand and ensuring that you're driving revenue. And so you saw a number of examples that Terry showed of concepts, and inherent in those is a set of transactions. And I'm using the word here transaction a little bit more loosely, not specifically always a monetary transaction, but some high-value interaction or flow that a consumer or employee would have with your organization that drives some sort of business result. And the key question or the key goal should be to optimize how well those work. And the questions to be thinking about is, well, how well are those working on mobile? So whether it's, you know, the mobile point of sale, the concierge, the promotion concept that we were talking about, you know, these all map to the kinds of things that you should be focusing on, but how well are they working? And if they aren't working well, what impact does that have to your revenue or bottom line? And then finally, well, what if they aren't working to your expectations? What do you do about it, right? So those three questions is what I'm going to be spending some time on now. Let's define a little bit, you know, a bit more what are examples of high-value transactions. So Terry kind of set the stage here. I mean, if you took the 18 concepts in Hydra, all of them, you know, map to a transaction or flow that a user has with your organization, with your retail company, and a number of those are extremely high value. So mobile point of sale, the checkout, the pickup of merchandise, using, redeeming or charging loyalty points, doing a promotion in the app. All of these result in some direct impact, potentially, you know, usually some sort of revenue impact that would be associated with that. And if it's not a revenue impact, you can measure the amount of productivity time that your workers are saving or losing if they use that concept, right? So it's not necessarily just revenue, it's also productivity, so of a retail associate. And each of these transactions that you have, you need to think about them in their start to finish scope. And what that means is, even if you took a simple, you know, a relatively simple thing like a checkout, there are actually many screens associated with that. So whether it's a mobile point of sale or the consumer on their direct app, there are often, you know, 10 different screens that the user's walking through from the start. So you have to, when you proceed to checkout, you review the order, you have to go through a shipping sequence, you know, choose how you're shipping it, where it's going. You have to do a payment sequence and choose how you're going to pay and confirm that. And then the final, and that's all happening before you do the final confirmation. And associated with this, right, you need to understand where the start is, where the end is, and then associate a revenue amount, a business value to each of these transactions. And that's the key step here that Terry was alluding to, is for each of these concepts, you need to mark a start, an end, and a business value. And why? That gives you the ability to understand the exact business impact in aggregate that the, you know, success or failure of these transactions has on your business. And that's kind of the key thing we're getting after here. If these aren't working well, obviously you're going to run into scenarios where you lose revenue or you're losing productivity of the employees. And in the modern world of mobile, I think you've all run into this, right? You're using a mobile app, and it takes too long. So the worst case in a retail sense is trying to do a purchase and you can't complete it, so the transaction fails. In other cases, the app is unable to communicate to back-end service, so there's some sort of network error. Similarly, you can run into a more abrupt scenario, which would be a crash. And I think we've all run into this, right, where the app just disappears and stops responding, and you get a message saying this app has stopped. That's kind of the worst case scenario. And I'll tell you a little bit in terms of statistics on how frequent that is, so you can benchmark your own app in a second here. And then the final is it's just running slowly. So usually this is driven by the app trying to communicate to something on the back end, which is taking too long, and the user's just left hanging. And so your goal here is to look at the performance across the entire transaction and understand how those impact your business goals, and business goals being the brand or the bottom line associated with your app that you're trying to accomplish. And broadly speaking, in the world of technical performance metrics, there are two big bucket items that rear their head to create problems for your app and for users completing these flows or transactions. The one is responsiveness, so how fast does the app respond? If it takes too long, you can lose the user. And then the second is what we would call uptime, or crashes. And this is a pretty sort of fatal error, if you will. And these two things together are what you need to keep your eye on. And the first thing is, well, what is your target, right? What benchmark should you be shooting for? So when it comes to responsiveness, the idea here is you don't want the user to start thinking of something else, and then mentally switching context, and then worst case dropping out of the app and doing something else. And there's been a lot of user perception studies on this, and some widely cited material shows, cognitively people perceive things, under a tenth of a second to really be instantaneous. If it's up to, 300 milliseconds, you can see the delay, but it's not such a big deal. More than that, in less than a second, you definitely notice it. And after a second, the human brain is actually moving on to something else. You're no longer thinking, this is slow. You're thinking, what do I need to get for lunch? Or, gosh, I had another email I needed to respond to. Should I do that? And after 10 seconds, people will switch and do the other task, right? And so at that point, in this red zone, so after about a second, you're in the danger zone, and you generally want your app to respond faster than that. The reality is apps today really don't in many scenarios. So let me give you some concrete data. Crittercism, we monitor about 1 billion users, and we do some aggregate benchmarking to help mobile retailers understand where they need to be with this information. So the way to think about this is the average mobile app has 6 or more back-end services it connects to. And services that your app connects to, what do I mean by that? This is things like Facebook or your e-commerce system or the server that's providing all the images for your product catalog. All of these things are services that your app connects to. They're external to the mobile device, to the app. And you want all of them to work well, because the aggregate impact of that impacts the overall responsiveness impression the user gets. Our data shows that about half, 46% of services have a latency or a responsiveness that is over half a second. And if you remember earlier, I told you you really want it to be, under a second, but the problem here is it's not one service, it's all of these in aggregate, right? So people are noticing this delay, and so the aggregate impact is what's going to draw down the perception of how well your app is working and potentially have people drop off into other tasks. The second key item to think about here is uptime. This is the dreaded crash. We've all had it happen, but you definitely do not want it happening during a high-value transaction like a checkout, a mobile point of sale, a loyalty recharge, or redemption. And our data, again, looking across the aggregate data that we provide for benchmarking info. And by the way, you can get this info on data.crittercism.com. You can see publicly available benchmark information, so it's a good one to remember. But the high-level takeaway here is if you look at the average crash rates across all the apps that we monitor, and keep in mind these are customers that actively monitor and optimize performance, so the reality is in the wild, apps that aren't optimizing this have much worse performance. But the average here is, most apps have over a percent. So your target at a minimum is to get under 1%. Now, to put that in perspective, in the web world, they typically measure this in 9. So you would want an uptime of 99.9%, 3 nines, or 4 nines would be 99.99%. So what you can see from this is the world of mobile is way off that. At best, people at 2 nines. And now, to put that in perspective, you should understand that the best-in-class e-commerce retailers, so an example would be someone like Groupon, they have a crash rate that is under 0.02%. So they're almost at that 4 nines perspective, or 4 nines position. And that's really where you would like to be, right? 1% is frankly not good enough in the world of retail, given so much is at stake. So why is this hard? Well, put simply, getting performance right is complicated by an incredibly complex mobile ecosystem. There are hundreds of different OS versions to monitor, 6 or more cloud services, thousands of devices, hundreds of carriers. All of this, complicates things. I mean, if you multiply that out, you have hundreds of millions of different variations that you need to ensure work. Every user's on a different sort of permutation of this, and you need to make sure it works for everybody. And so to get this right, you ideally want something that helps you provide information in this complex ecosystem, right? And so you want visibility into the errors. This is the uptime we're talking about, and understand what happened, if crashes occurred, how many users were impacted. You want to understand the services, so this is the responsiveness. This is the long pole in the tent that tells you typically what the responsiveness perception is for your users, what's the latency of that app. And then you want to connect the dots between those two to your transactions. So let me give you 3 recommendations based on this. First of all, dovetailing off what I just said, the key here is to connect this performance metric information directly to how well your transactions are performing. So the use cases and concepts Terry identified, a set of those are extremely high value, and you want to understand what the aggregate revenue impact is to your business. And so this is a screenshot from one of our dashboards that would show a retailer, well, what is the revenue risk in aggregate? Once you know that, if you see that revenue risk is increasing, say, per this hour, you've got tens of thousands of dollars at stake, you should identify and prioritize which particular transaction, of the ones you've identified as high value. Which of those is performing or adding the most revenue risk? So you can see in the right-hand column here, that's what you need to look at. So that brings you to recommendation 3. Once you know how to identify and prioritize by revenue impact, you want to understand why it's going wrong. And so the second recommendation here is have the mechanism to understand, well, what's at the high level, what's driving this performance issue. So here's a drill down into a retail transaction, and you can see the success rate has dropped all of a sudden, and you can see that the failure rate, which has been characterized by crashes or aborted apps, or the timeout of the app. So this is the responsiveness aspect. You want to know quickly, well, what's driving it? And here you can see, well, when the revenue risk spiked at this time, we see that the crash rate also spiked. So that brings you to the third recommendation, which is great. Once you know that, how do you troubleshoot that quickly? And you want insight with all the diagnostics associated with the users that were impacted to quickly identify and fix those high priority issues. And you should be able to also unwind particular user interactions. So imagine that this is one user. Perhaps it's easy from the section earlier that Terry's talking about, and she was trying to do a checkout, and you can actually unwind that failure. So it crashed for her, but you can see, well, gosh, there was revenue at stake. She had $147 at stake, and you can actually see what she was trying to do, what screen she clicked on, what servers calls were made. She switched connectivity, and then lo and behold, she loses connectivity, tries to make a payment, and the app crashes. And your app should handle that more gracefully. So this is where you would have your team get involved to quickly fix this scenario and ensure that there's a graceful exit and saves the shopping cart and prompts people to come back when they can. So quick case study, Urban Outfitters uses this kind of approach. They leverage data like this, metrics like this about technical performance on both store associate-based mobile point of sales as well as the consumer application. For their point of sale devices, when they rolled this out, it turned out as they were rolling out, they had a 6% downtime. They were able to drop that to under 1% by using information like this that quickly hones in on, the things that matter most that are impacting your revenue. A second scenario is Groupon. Groupon uses the same technique. So just to put this in perspective, Groupon has hundreds of thousands of revenue per hour going through the system. They have 54% of all their mobile, 54% of all transactions is done through mobile, and it's extremely important that this runs well. And they leverage the same kind of data via Crittercism to ensure that the apps work well to protect their brand and protect that revenue that's at stake. And they've been able to drop their crash rate down to 0.02%, as I said earlier, with phenomenal star ratings. They have five-star ratings on their apps. So with that, let me bring things to a T. I'm going to take a couple questions and then wrap things up. So before we close things out, let me mention, I'm just going to take a quick look at the questions here. I have a couple here that we can take. So Kristina, yes, the first, the question I want to pose to you is if things are so complicated, I mean, we just went through a presentation where there are all these complex facets of what user behavior is doing, where the mobile trends are going, all the different technology components, yet you said it looks like that things are moving in store, app development is coming in-house. What do you, put those two things together for us? Why, if it's so complicated, why are people, taking apps in-house?
Let me clarify here. So companies are taking the app development in-house from the agencies that have been, UI, UX agencies, design agencies, what have you, that have been focusing on the visual and the design aspect. But in terms of truly understanding the consumer, companies feel that they need to take that in-house. However, they're working with a new breed of companies such as Crittercism, Mobiquity, and MoveWeb and Mobiquity to understand the performance of the apps, and that's something that they acknowledge that they can't do internally. They don't have the automated tools, they don't have the analytics team in-house to properly monitor that. So it's a new breed of companies they're partnering with, and instead of seeding all of their apps in terms of development, they're taking development in-house, but they're working with companies to understand how they work.
Great, cool. Thanks for clarifying.
I actually have a question for you now. So
sure.
I know Columbia Business School did a study, I believe, last year that showed that more than 60% of in-store shoppers actually use the mobile web to gather more product information before making an in-store purchase. So it's important to emphasize here that Crittercism and Mobiquity actually help to identify losses in the in-store revenue model, not just mobile web transactions.
Was that a question or a point?
It's a point, but it's also a question in terms of if you have any data in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, so our data, I mean, sort of the benchmark info is definitely drawn from both B2C and the B2E realm. So, for example, on Urban Outfitters, we're used on both sides. And similarly, actually, Groupon is used on both sides. So they have a merchant using iPad app that's used to do checkouts and point of sales and run Groupon campaigns for that merchant. And, we're used on both direct consumer and as well as the, retailer side as well as apps in the store. And, I think as you pointed out earlier, the journey is complicated. So people are touching that retailer across many, many touch points across that space. And as it turns out, mobile is increasingly becoming, a critical one today. And, I think just in terms of the statistics, even just for this upcoming shopping season, it's sort of geared up to be really the biggest ever, and I think that's why we're all here. This is where the opportunity is today. So,
yeah, Kristina, I would just add something to what Josh just said. We mentioned that we track a lot of analytics related to both the in-store shopping center shopping experience, but what we're seeing is like a convergence of, there are certain sets of metrics that the in-store retailers have traditionally tracked, and those have to do with sales and sales per hour and sales per square foot of the retail store and things like that. But the e-commerce sites track a whole different set of metrics that have to do with site traffic and page visits and conversion rates and the cart abandonment rates and things like that. But now, as we have over 80% of customers walking into the store with mobile devices in their hands and using those mobile devices for their shopping experience, we're seeing a conversion of those metrics to where basically a lot of the metrics we only did on e-commerce sites before, we're now starting to do in the in-store environment. So we have a lot more information in which to improve that in-store experience, including kind of the showrooming thing that you were talking about. But it's causing, if retailers don't implement these new innovation areas within their stores, they're not going to have that data, and so therefore they're not going to be as competitive within the marketplace.
Terrific, thank you. That's very fascinating. I think this is interesting because it really debunks the myth that consumers only use mobile, or rather use mobile to do research on a product to buy online, or in the store looking at products that they're going to eventually buy online, but mobile is actually driving traffic into the store.
Yes.
And I can definitely add, we've because this system is used to monitor, actual transactions that are occurring and checkout transactions. We definitely see some pretty significant traffic being pumped through apps for actual, checkout-based transactions for some of the retailers we're working with. But unfortunately, I can't go into specific details there. That's the kind of info that's a little bit more sensitive. But anyway, folks, we've reached the top of the hour, and I really appreciate everyone joining us. Let's bring this to a close. This webinar has been recorded. We will make it available to everybody that attended, and would welcome you to reach out either to Crittercism. You see our website and you can get hold of us. Mobiquity is there as well. And Kristina, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. And Terry, also to you, I appreciate you sharing both of your expertise with the audience. For those of you interested in additional benchmarking info to understand where your app should be, take a look at Crittercism.com, data.crittercism.com, and we have some info up there that you can take a look at. So with that, thank you to both presenters, and thank you all for joining us today. Thanks again, and have a good day.